Every year, fishing gear is lost in our oceans due to storm activity, boat traffic, and gear abandonment. Derelict fishing gear haunts our oceans, catching all kinds of marine animals in its path. This is called ghost fishing, and it is a global problem. Everyone is impacted by ghost fishing, and there are many players involved in finding a solution. Here's one perspective.
My name is Shawna Rowe, and I am currently a marine science instructor with Cape Fear Community College in Wilmington, North Carolina. And I teach everything from the gambit of marine chemistry to water analysis and then into fisheries gear. Historically, fishing in this community, and especially up towards the Outer Banks area in North Carolina, has been a way of life. It's what's put food on the table for families for generations now. It's what they do, it's what they know, and the majority of them are out there to take care of the ocean the same as the rest of us. Well, specifically in the past 50 years or so, maybe as many as 60 years, we've seen the change, the majority of the change has occurred in the materials that are being used. So they've gone from almost all natural materials, from cotton, hemp, sisal, and the gambit on that goes on, all plant-based materials. That has changed in their abilities to make these amazing synthetics that make the gear not only fish better, but make it last longer, which makes it more economical. Fishing gear is lost in a multitude of ways, depending on, again, what the gear actually is. So typically it's storms, currents, and bad boat traffic that are going to lead to that, or poor maintenance of the gear in general. Occasionally, you've got gear that is just simply abandoned. So the gill nets specifically are big culprits when it comes to ghost fishing, at least on the East Coast, I think. The trawls, interestingly enough, because they're designed to be drugged through the water to fish, they don't tend to be as big of a problem ghost fishing later. They do cause destruction to habitat if they're left on the bottom, which can then cause problems in the areas, but they weren't meant to fish by themselves, and so they don't tend to do too much fishing by themselves. I think we're all impacted by ghost fishing. If you enjoy commercial fish, or you enjoy to recreationally fish yourself. So if you purchase fish and seafood to eat, or if you are a recreational fisherman yourself or a commercial fisherman yourself, then you're certainly impacted, because ghost fishing is out there continuing to reduce fish populations, and that's what you guys would be after for seafood and fishing, recreational and commercial. Not only fish populations, but can cause damage to populations of our sea turtles, seabirds, sea mammals. All of those populations are affected in some way or another. So I think we're all affected by it in that way. Gill nets in North Carolina have been highly restricted and regulated almost completely out. So we don't see the use of those gill nets in North Carolina the way we used to, and we certainly don't see them the way that they are still being used in the Northeast. So ways to reduce ghost fishing. So biodegradable materials are certainly one step in that direction. Their problem is how cost effective they would actually be. Biodegradable materials will do just that. They'll continue to biodegrade, whether it's because they're lost in ghost fishing or because they're actually being fished by the commercial fisher or recreational fisher, which means as they break down, they need to be replaced more often. I mean, if I've got issues with the gear being lost in storms or in currents, well, you can choose to pay closer attention to storm and weather patterns and not set gear when you know that there's potential for those storms coming. There's electronics that can be put onto gear. We've got acoustical electronics that can be put on there that will send GPS information. GPS marking in general, when you put your gear down, making sure you're logging a GPS for where it is that you put it in the event that you do have to run from a storm and come back to the area. At least you've got a reasonable idea as to where it was when you left it. Additionally, things like doing side scan sonar of areas and getting better pictures of the bottom can give us better ideas of if there are any obstructions that are down there that may cause gear loss. In addition to that, I think stopping ghost fishing is going to take a complex maneuver of having volunteers that are out there bringing gear in. We're going to need to make sure that we've got programs in place for when commercial fishermen pick up this gear that's been lost, because they do. They're out there fishing the ocean. As they fish the ocean for fish, they pick up lost gear. But we need to make some sort of program that allows for them to bring this gear in, and they do have programs that are recycling this gear. Marine education is part of the solution to ghost fishing because we are educating students, fishermen, and the public on how to responsibly use fishing gear and how to reduce ghost fishing.
My name is William McClellan. I'm the North Carolina State Stranding Coordinator. I work at University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and work with undergraduates and graduate students in responding to strandings here in the state. I also one of two people up and down in the East Coast that respond to all large whale strandings. So if there's a stranding of a sperm whale or a right whale or even a humpback whale that has an interesting interaction question, then I'm one of two people that will be called for to conduct a necropsy on those. So we travel extensively up and down the East Coast responding to strandings. Marine mammals strand for a number of reasons. We just went through an unusual mortality event with bottlenose dolphins. They actually had a virus. But we also see a significant other component of the stranding network is looking at bad interactions that we have with dolphins and whales. We actually do interact with them a bunch of ways. They do get hit by ships. And one of the things here, especially in North Carolina, we see interactions with marine mammals in fishing gear. My line of work, working with strandings, it's an interesting line. It's kind of difficult to draw a very precise line between active fishing gear and ghost gear. Ghost gear being technically, it's gear that has been lost to fishing anymore. It's lost its buoys. It's not fishing the way it's supposed to be. It's not being retrieved the way it's supposed to be retrieved, but it's still fishing down on the bottom or wherever it is set. Marine mammals are impacted by fishing gear in a number of different ways, but the big problem is that you have commercial fisheries that are out there trying to catch fish to feed the public. Well, the dolphins and porpoises and whales are out there trying to catch the exact same fish quite often. So that just inherently puts them in a conflict zone at times. That puts the dolphin trying to take fish from that's in a gill net or something. They actually will go and try to actually pull fish out of that gill net. It's a free meal for them. They didn't have to go chase it too very far. If the animal gets into the gear, they may wrap around the gear, but if it's a gill net, they usually can break through that gill net. It's just really fine mesh webbing of monofilament. They can usually break through that, but occasionally they'll catch line on it and catch it on their fluke or catch it on their flippers. And so what we've done is they've actually made these weak links that are in the gear. So they'll actually have a piece of line that the line may be rated to 5,000 or 10,000 pounds, but they'll have a 600-pound wink link in the middle of it. So that will actually, if the whale gets caught in the gear, that wink link will part, and that part of that gear will just break away, and the animal won't have to carry it around anymore. Fishing gear, that's one of the things that's been really worked on a lot in this, trying to change the way the gear is fished, to try to make them be able to catch the fish that they want to catch, but also if there is an interaction to make sure that that marine mammal can get away at the same time. So there's a lot of ways that gear are changed. There's little special ways that either way is fished. There was particularly a gill net off from the coast of North Carolina up through New Jersey. It was tied down at one time so that the fish would run into it, but it made a bag. It fished almost like a shrimp net that way. So what they did was they just cut these tie downs, and then the net stood up straight, so a dolphin or a porpoise would hit the net and then just bounce off. That seemed to change a lot of the interactions. Didn't change how many fish they caught all that much. So the commercial fishermen got to live with the solution, and we don't think we caused any of that, and it lessened the impact on marine mammals. One of the solutions is also work as diligently we can to get the gear out, get it back again. I think one of the things that would be really good, we've talked about this on a number of these take reduction teams, is just reporting how much gear is lost. Ghost fishing, again, is a huge category. There's lots of different gear types that are out there, and the really important thing is to make sure that gear is that fine line. It's strong enough so that we can get it back when a storm comes through or an animal entangles with it. So that's what we try to do, is making sure that work is, we try to make sure that the animal can get out, but the gear can be recovered at the same time. A whole other avenue of this, I think, is a really significant problem, though, is there's just vast amounts of gear out there. As a rule, there's always a lot more gear than fish can be landed out there. I would like to see it go both ways. We can make sure that the gear has really good, we can interact with the marine mammals and we can release them, but it would be really nice also to think that we just lessen the amount of gear that's out there. Everybody can make a living. You don't have to buy so much gear. You don't have to tend so much gear. They spend a whole lot of time throwing bycatch overboard that's never going to be landed. So if we could, reach again that happy spot of less gear in the water, there'll be less interaction, less gear has to be bought. Marine mammal scientists will help in reducing ghost fishing because I think it really helps. You have to understand all aspects of the problem. So I don't commercially fish, but I expect the commercial fisheries to come up with, this is how they can fish. But it really helps to understand, what does a marine mammal want out there too? What are they doing? Understanding where animals are, how they're moving back and forth, how much food do they need, when are they giving birth, things like that helps provide a picture, put a picture together for how we can help manage these interactions with fisheries up and down the East Coast.
My name's Stephen Parrish. I've been doing net work or trawl work, any kind of commercial fishing gear work, pretty much my whole life. My dad started the business and I grew up in it. We make mainly shrimp trawls, but we also make turtle excluders, any kind of fish excluders, anything gear related to the fishing industry.
I've been working with Stephen and my Uncle Steve for going on 7 years now, something like that, give or take.
Well, my experience with fishing nets includes anywhere from work to pleasure. We build them, we use them, we catch our food with them. This is a turtle excluder or a TED. A turtle excluder is basically a filter. You're just like in a car, you'd have an air filter to stop things from getting in. This is all that's going to be. It just lets what you want in and lets the things you don't want out.
There's 12 approved bycatch reduction devices that the state of North Carolina approves of. This is the most common. It's called a fish eye. And what it allows you to do is you hook the end of your TED up there and everything makes it past the TED into the back. And the fish swim back up and swim out through this hole and out this basin here.
They were designed through trial and error, basically. Started out, they had a problem with marine fisheries. Different groups, knew they needed to do something with bycatch reduction. It was refined down to what you see. It started as some of the first ones we had were actually PVC pipe that was cut. Without fishermen, it would be harder for them to do it because they'll give fishermen different devices to use. They'll actually go out and try them. They'll run a control versus a test net, and then compare. They'll have observers on the boat to help compare what's what. And actually, there's fishermen that have come up with stuff on their own and submitted it. So fishermen do their part. Regulations have changed dramatically, at least in my lifetime, from I would say very little to a lot.
Yeah.
Turtle excluders come about in mid-late 80s, and that was a big thing. Shrimpers were really against it. They were going to lose their shrimp and everything. And some of them wanted to, try it just to see how it worked. But now, you would be hard-pressed to find a shrimper that would not pull one because of the help that it gives them by getting rid of the bycatch. Daddy was on the panel for the bycatch reduction, shrimp fisheries management, all the ones that you could be on, and he was very instrumental in getting some of this figured out. In this particular area, I don't think ghost fishing is really impacting anything other than maybe losing the crab pot. Somebody like losing the crab pot. A lot of the shrimp trawls are so expensive that the people pulling them really don't want to lose them. So in the event they hang up and they lose a whole net, which is not that often, they'll go back and try to retrieve it up to the point of getting a diver to dive down to find it and hook to it.
You got multiple lines that goes back to your net, so if it breaks in the middle, you can get the other half back.
Very few nets lost completely in the shrimp industry because everybody wants their stuff back. Even if it's $100 worth, they still want it back. And they're always hooked to it, so it's easy to get back. It's not like a crab pot that's put over and lost forever if they lose the buoy. One problem here is small, but if that problem is multiplied over the course of a state, a coast, a whole country, everywhere, that could add up to a great reduction in the amount of fish or whatever species you may be targeting. So preventing that would help for everybody to have a little more to catch whenever they can. So working with commercial fishermen that may have a ghost fishing problem to come up with the best solution for everybody should become the first priority. Then you find a solution and implement it so that everybody wins instead of one side winning and one side losing. I think if you look at the history of fishermen and what they've been through as a whole and what they've done already to help with bycatch reduction, help with whatever turtle excluders, with whatever it might be, I think that's proof enough to know that fishermen as a whole are out there willing to help and do their part for the environment.
So my name is Fred Shar. I'm a professor of biology and marine biology at UNCW. I've been here since 2002, so almost 15 years. My focus is on coastal fisheries resources. In order to sustainably manage a fish stock, we really need to know a lot about the life history of the fish in terms of growth rates, mortality rates, habitat use, movement patterns, because it helps us to understand how that stock is going to respond when we harvest them. And so we work a lot with commercial fishermen, recreational fishermen, to help us understand how they're interacting with fish stocks and how our research is going to inform our ability to manage them. So my experience with fishing nets is extensive, I would say. We use nets a lot for our research, and gill nets have become a major gear that we use to sample certain life stages. And so we can use beach seines and trawls, small trawls, which are actively fished gears, to catch smaller individuals. But for the adults, the subadult and adult fish, really gill nets are a valuable gear for what we do. And we've also partnered with lots of commercial fishermen and use nets in conjunction with those fishermen to catch fish for tagging projects and life history projects in lots of different ways. So we've utilized the gear a lot. So ghost fishing is a problem because it creates what's called a cryptic source of mortality. It's a source of mortality that we have trouble, we can't quantify it very well. So it's an added source of mortality, and when it's high and we don't know it, right, it's a source of uncertainty in our population models. And if it's unaccounted for, then our population models end up giving biased estimates of the overall mortality of the stock. We don't tend to see a lot of it, primarily because the state has a pretty good program to try to remove that gear on a regular basis, mostly through the Marine Patrol agents that are out there. But Marine Patrol also will do surveys on a regular basis for derelict gill net gear, because the gill nets now in the state used to be, up until recently, up until 2010 or 11, that gill net gear could be fished continuously. In other words, a fisherman could put his gear in the water and go and just check his gear daily, but never move it. So the gill nets would basically stay in the water 24/7. That made it really challenging for Marine Patrol to identify derelict gear because it was there all the time. Well, now, because of regulatory actions, they can't do that anymore. They have to set their gear in the evening and then pick it up by a certain time in the morning. So in the middle of the day at lunchtime, if there's a gill net out there, it's being fished illegally. So Marine Patrol can spot those really quickly and they can contact the fishermen directly based on the numbers that are marked on the gear and say, hey, you've got a piece of gear out here, what's going on? And the fisherman could, if there was a rational explanation, they could say, hey, my boat broke down, or I got injured, or something happened and I couldn't get to my gear. But if not, the Marine Patrol can pull it. And I think because of the regulatory changes to the gill nets and the winter cleanup efforts for the crab pots, I think that ghost fishing is pretty low here. I think trying to quantify the extent of ghost fishing through surveys of, for instance, in North Carolina in the coastal estuaries, having regular surveys to get an idea of the number of unattended crab traps, the number of gill nets that have been lost, and trying to quantify those spatially and temporally and see how the rates of occurrence of those gears change seasonally would be really helpful to know the extent of ghost fishing that might be occurring. I think education is important in terms of just, I think most fishermen, recreational and commercial, that use fishing gear, they don't want to leave gear on the bottom. Gear costs money, whether you're a recreational or commercial fisherman. It costs money when you lose gear. But just constantly educating them about the potential problems that it can cause, so that they're less likely to abandon gear. If they can retrieve it and remove it, they will. And so it's important that fishermen understand that, hey, if we have high ghost fishing rates, it's going to impact our ability to fish. So we need to remove that gear and prevent it from being out there.
My name is Brian Ure. I'm a fisheries enforcement officer for the North Carolina Marine Patrol. I've worked in this role for 22 years, primarily here in New Hanover County, as well as Brunswick and Pender counties. My experience with fishing nets is, over the course of my career, over 20 years, a large role in my job is to enforce the rules and regulations that govern the net, all net fisheries. In that time, I've enforced the rules with trawl nets as well as gill nets, everything from small mesh spot nets to large mesh flounder nets. Nets impact my work on a daily basis. Most recently, the federal government has issued an incidental take permit, or ITP for short, to North Carolina in reference to the large mesh gill net industry and its interaction with sea turtles. This affects me as a Marine Patrol officer. Each week, officers are required to do a minimum of 1 gill net observation to stay in compliance with this ITP, which we go out and monitor the interactions between sea turtles and large mesh gill net fishery. All fisheries in North Carolina are very important. If you go by landings in 2016, blue crabs were the #1 as far as amount of landings. It was 24.7 million pounds of blue crabs landed in North Carolina in 2016, using primarily crab pots for that fishery. Secondly, the shrimp was 13.2 million pounds of shrimp landed, primarily trawl nets in that fishery, and followed by various types of finfish that use a large various type of gear, gill nets, trawl nets, as well as hook and line. Locally, for example, the large mesh gill net fishery, it's broken into North Carolina up into 5 management areas. Those management areas determine attendance, days that nets can be set, as well as times that nets can be left. Each of those is managed by area. The area I primarily work in is Management Area E, which is Highway 58 bridge just north of Swansboro to the South Carolina state line. In Management Area E, it's the open period for large mesh gill net is an hour before sunset each evening, and to be picked up no later than an hour after sunrise, and that's Sunday through Thursday nights for that fishery. Gill nets are marked in North Carolina by 2 yellow buoys on each end, and those buoys will have the fisherman's information, the first 2 initials and last full name, as well as the NC numbers of the vessel they use to fish that gear. That's how we can locate whose gear it is if it is left behind. Also, you can see the 2 yellow buoys and know that there's usually a gill net in between those two buoys. There are several ways gear can become lost. theft can be an issue, as well as storms. Inclement weather can cause gear to become lost. Interactions with large mammals, large animals in the ocean, as well as even boaters. Accidental collisions with gear can also, all those can cause gear to be lost. Early on in my career, there was a lot more gear that was found abandoned and gill nets lost. And in recent years, North Carolina has made great measures to increase management in the gill net fishery. In this, it's very rare that gill nets are left unattended, if at all, for very short periods of time. And if it is, like I said, it's for very short periods of time, so the likelihood that gear is going to become ghost fishing gear is unlikely. There are no rules in North Carolina that require fishermen to report lost gear. Usually, fishermen will contact their local Marine Patrol officer to report lost gear because they're hoping to recover that gear. Marine Patrol officers, regular and routinely in their job, that we recover gear that's abandoned, lost as a part of our job every day. I care greatly about North Carolina's fisheries resource. That's why I chose this career. And I definitely don't want to see any ghost gear in the water that can impact any of our fisheries negatively. It's important to prevent ghost fishing, to protect our natural resource, our fisheries here in North Carolina, as well as maintain clean waterways for the boating public. As far as how that can be done, North Carolina's already made great strides in their management. I think we do a great job, and I've seen it over my career. It's greatly reduced the amount of ghost gear that we find in the water. Solutions to ghost fishing gear starts, of course, with regulation through North Carolina. We've done our part on the management, on the net industry. Other things that can be done is increased diligence on the part of the fishermen to maintain contact with their gear, to remove it in times of inclement weather. Also, cautiousness on the part of the boating public to make sure there's no accidental collisions with gear that can cause them to become lost or ghost gear. Fisheries regulators are part of the solution for ghost fishing gear because through us ensuring compliance of North Carolina's fisheries rules and regulations, it greatly reduces the amount of time that this gear is left alone, if at all, in North Carolina's waters. So it greatly reduces the chance of them becoming ghost fishing gear.
My name is Gene Long. I opened Mont's Channel Seafood 27 years ago in May of 1990, and been owner-operator since then. I started the business from scratch, and it's been very successful. We buy fish from all up and down the coast. I mean, we have a lot of fishermen bring us fish to our docks directly. We do have to rely on some imported, it's very seasonal. Whenever we can, naturally we're going to use local fresh seafood, but we have high standards for our imported fish and shrimp, and you know, you just can't get enough on a regular basis to support a business like mine if you don't use some imported, but we try to use all the local fresh we can. Dramatically. I started 50-some years ago, commercial fishing part-time, and I've always done it part-time. I've never solely relied on commercial fishing, but I've done a lot of it. And the regulation, we need regulations, but we need to give regulations time to work also. And I feel like sometimes they may get a little ahead of themselves, and that puts a lot of people out of business that are trying to make a living catching certain species, and we just need to let it work and not try to over-regulate. I have customers ask me if do I have problems getting enough seafood, and most of the time the answer is we don't have a problem, but it's not really from that's just the nature of the business, because weather dictates a lot of our supply. So it's always been, you know, feast or famine in the seafood business. We don't wholesale like we used to. I mean, the regulations have put a lot of people just couldn't make it. So I don't have abundance of seafood to wholesale like I did 25 years ago, but I still luckily have enough to supply my business. It supports a lot of livelihood for people, And of course people like to eat fresh seafood, I hope. Fishing gear is probably their biggest expense, and they have to take care of it, and that's how they make their living. And just like any other profession, that's your livelihood, so you're not going to just throw it away or leave it out there. And if a fisherman pays $200 or $300 for a net, he's not going to just leave it out there. He's going to take care of it. And I've been around Rocheville Beach 66 years, and I've never found a gill net or from time to time you'll see a crab pot, but they have the escape rings in them, so if somebody does lose one, it kind of becomes a haven for smaller fish. I mean, it doesn't really kill fish, so that doesn't really hurt a whole lot. So no, I don't think it's a problem. I don't know about worldwide, because I don't know how big the problem is. Of course, I'll just pay attention locally, and I don't really think it's a problem at all. I mean, I'm in these waters all the time. I never find any gear or anything that would trap or harm seafood. I fish the Gulf Stream a lot. I mean, I do. That's probably 75% of my fishing. I go to the Gulf Stream. Well, that is international waters, and it's long line and territory. And I've never, in 50 years, I probably hadn't seen maybe a net or two, and mostly you see buoys, just a styrofoam buoy the size of a basketball. I mean, just floating along by itself with no line or hook or anything. I mean, you just don't see it. I mean, off of here you don't. So maybe in foreign countries, just take care of your fishing gear and be responsible.
My name is Mont, Leonie, and I'm the Executive Director for Plastic Ocean Project, and I'm also the Director of Science, Research, and Academic Partnerships. Plastic Ocean Project really came out of the research. I started in 2008, so I've been working on this for 9 years now. And in 2012, after I graduated, I decided that, gosh, you can't see what I've seen and just forget about it, or write a thesis and defend and say, well, that was horrible. So I decided to start a nonprofit organization so that I could give other young people interested in this topic an opportunity to see what I've seen and learn what I've learned. What's really alluring about it is the fact that you really can't see it. When you look out over the ocean, it doesn't sit on top, right? It's actually hanging in the water column. So it's very, very difficult to actually see looking out over the ocean. You actually have to be in it to actually see it. So this is why a lot of incidents occur where people are accidentally driving over these huge wads of gear and getting entangled in it. NOAA predicts about 10% of what we find by volume is ghost gear. Now, when you think about 10%, it doesn't sound like much, right? It's only 10%. Now, what we know about plastic is it doesn't degrade very well in the ocean environment. So every year that compounds, right? So that 10% is a really big, big number. Fishing is important, especially for the economy here in North Carolina. Part of why our state happens to do so well with tourism is because people come here to hire our charter fishermen to go offshore and fish, as well as to come here and eat some really awesome seafood. About 1 billion people rely on fish as their protein. And this ghost gear, though it's lost, is still collecting fish. It's now competing with the fishing industry. And so it adds yet one more stressor to our fish populations. Marine debris researchers are vital to understanding what is happening with our marine life. Like, if we didn't research this issue of plastics, we probably wouldn't know that there is 5.25 trillion pieces of plastic floating around in the ocean right now, and that's just on the surface, right? So it's the research that drives the solutions. What can we do to stop this ghost gear from ending up in the ocean? There's a lot of things we can do. One, of course, is legislation, right? So we input laws that reduce the amount of time that this fishing gear can be left in the ocean, like the crab pots, right? So if we reduce the time, then there's less chance. The other thing that we can do is start getting innovative. So if we know that whales get entangled in this gear, and it's so durable that a 40-ton animal can't break it. Maybe we need to design the nets that they'll break at a certain threshold so that they will snap when these whales are swimming around at great speeds trying to remove this gear. And then lastly, and probably what each and every one of us can do, is not buy frozen fish in the freezer case. So that particular fish is the fish that's doing the most amount of damage. They're taking out a lot of bycatch, trying to catch a lot of fish so that they can have that fish in the freezer case. So avoid that, avoid buying canned tuna. Like, these are things that we can do, avoid, or at least reduce how much we're eating. That doesn't mean you can't eat fish, because everywhere you live, there's fish available, in our streams and rivers and lakes and in our ocean. So buy local fish. Support your local economy by buying those from those fishermen. I feel one of the best solutions we have to this problem is working together with the fishing industry. So the fishing industry, they don't want this ghost gear taking out the fish that they're targeting. It's a problem for them as well. And if we don't agree with fishing or not fishing, we can all agree that ghost gear is a problem for both marine life and the fishing industry. So let's work together. Let's figure out a way where we can help the fishing industry, and let's start working together to get rid of this ghost gear.